My father slapped me for asking to borrow the BMW I'd been paying for, so I quietly stopped paying for my family's entire life. The first thing I noticed when I hit the floor wasn't the pain. It was the carpet beneath my face. It was a cream-colored Persian rug I'd bought for my mother 2 Christmases earlier, after she casually mentioned she'd always wanted a real one in her living room. I spent weeks finding the right one, because I wanted to give my mother something she'd always dreamed of owning. Now my cheek was pressed against it, and all I could think was one thing. I had paid for the rug I was bleeding on. My mother quietly adjusted a throw pillow without looking at me. My younger sister, Chloe, barely glanced up before going back to filing her nails. My father stood over me, breathing heavily, as though hitting his own daughter had simply ended an argument. Something inside me went quiet. I stopped believing anything I said would ever matter to them. I slowly got to my feet, straightened my blazer, and walked toward the front door. Before I stepped outside into the rain, I made the quietest and most important decision of my life. I was done trying to earn a place in a family that had never truly valued me. My name is Evelyn Hartwell. I'm 31 years old. I have a master's degree in business administration from the University of Michigan, and 8 months before that night, I had been promoted into a VP-level role at Arkbridge Partners, a mid-sized tech consulting firm where every room expected me to be sharp, composed, and useful. At work, people trusted me with million-dollar clients. At home, they trusted me to pay every bill. Somewhere along the way, one favor turned into 5 years of paying their mortgage, Chloe's BMW, groceries, utilities, and every emergency that came along. No one asked anymore. They simply expected me to pay. The biggest presentation of my career was less than 12 hours away. I'd spent 6 weeks preparing for it, but my flight was canceled, my car broke down, and borrowing the BMW became my only realistic option. Since I'd been paying for it anyway, I stopped by my parents' house that night to ask for the keys. My father answered the door looking annoyed. The TV was on, and my mother sat on the couch while Chloe barely looked up from filing her nails. I explained why I needed the BMW and promised to bring it back in 2 days. I need the BMW for 2 days, I said. I'll return it with a full tank. My father did not even look away from the television. Chloe needs it tomorrow. I looked at Chloe. Please, this is my career. She looked at me without even the hint of a smile. She meant every word. Don't be dismissive just because your life is all corporate pressure. I am paying for that car. He muted the television and stood up. The room fell silent, and I still didn't think he was going to hit me. You always make everything about you, he said. No, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I make everything possible for you. His hand moved before I could react, and the slap sent me crashing onto the rug. Nobody moved. My mother adjusted a pillow, Chloe went back to filing her nails, and my father simply watched me. That was when I realized they cared more about what I paid for than about me. I stood up, straightened my blazer, and walked out. I walked into the rain, picked up the only rental car I could find, and started the overnight drive to Seattle. I stopped at a CVS, bought a bag of ice, and opened my banking app. First the BMW lease, then the utilities, then the internet, then the grocery deliveries. I disabled every automatic payment they'd quietly come to rely on. Then I checked the mortgage account. I'd removed myself from those payments 2 months earlier, so that night I only confirmed everything was still in place. The representative confirmed the mortgage was already in default. I thanked her and kept driving north. The 8-hour drive gave me too much time to think. By sunrise, I realized the slap wasn't what hurt most. It was realizing my family cared more about my money than about me. Arkbridge had booked me into the Kimpton Hotel Alexis, only a few blocks from the Ellison Group headquarters. Inside my room, I locked the door, dropped my overnight bag onto the bed, and finally looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. I covered the bruise as best I could and headed to the meeting. By 11:45, I was standing outside the Ellison Group boardroom. As I waited outside the boardroom, Priya texted me, "You've got this. Everyone believes in you." I smiled and slipped my phone back into my pocket. No one in that room knew what had happened the night before. They only saw the executive leading the presentation. The executives were already waiting when I walked in. Marcus, the CFO, greeted me with a handshake. Marcus nodded. "Whenever you're ready." "I've been ready for weeks," I said. For 3 hours, I answered every challenge until the room stopped testing me and started treating me like a future partner. Marcus closed his notebook. "One last question. Why Arkbridge?" I smiled. "Because real partnerships are built when things go wrong, not when everything is easy." He nodded. "Thank you." As I packed my laptop, Tanya quietly leaned toward me. "I hope we work together." "So do I." 19 hours later, Priya called. She didn't even say hello. "We got it!" I blinked. "What?" "We won, Evelyn." She was practically shouting. "The Ellison contract." I closed my eyes. "We actually won?" 12 million initial scope. I laughed in disbelief. A second email appeared from Dennis Calloway, my managing director. The subject line contained only 2 words. Outstanding work. Inside the email was a single sentence. Let's discuss your promotion next week. My phone rang again. After a moment, I answered. My mother never asked if I was okay. She only wanted to know why the Wi-Fi, groceries, and Chloe's BMW payments had stopped. I almost admired the consistency. My accounts are fine, I said calmly. Then fix whatever happened. I looked down at the wine glass in my hand. Chloe can't upload today's spa photos. I couldn't help smiling. That sounds inconvenient. Evelyn! She was silent for a few seconds before whispering. What? I stopped paying. For everything? Yes. But... Her breathing became uneven. You can't. I already did. My mother shifted instantly into familiar territory. Within seconds, she was blaming me for everything. You're overreacting. You're hurting the whole family. I listened quietly. When she finally paused to breathe, then my father took the phone. His voice was cold. You have responsibilities. I did. You owe this family. No. You'll regret this. I took another sip of wine. Before you drive anywhere to threaten me. I spoke softly. Go check your mailbox. I heard the front door open, followed by the scrape of the mailbox and the rustle of an envelope. A few seconds later, my father's voice changed completely. What? His voice sounded different. Smaller. What is this? I knew he was staring at the default notice. My father spoke again. Evelyn. His confidence had vanished. What did you do? I stopped carrying you, I said quietly. I stopped 2 months ago. Another long silence. For the first time in my life, my father begged. We're going to lose the house. His voice cracked. This is our home. It's your mortgage. Evelyn, please. Suddenly he was calling me sweetheart and baby again, words I hadn't heard in years. A scream echoed through the phone. My car! It was Chloe. Someone was already towing the BMW. Right on schedule. Through the phone, I heard Chloe screaming, while someone outside argued with my father as the BMW was towed away. I remembered Chloe bragging about her chakra appointment the night before. Maybe her chakras can help now, I said quietly. Then I ended the call. I sat there watching the Seattle skyline until I realized the guilt I'd expected was never coming. The guilt never came. For the first time in years, their problems were no longer mine. I slept for almost 12 hours because for the first time in years, my mind had stopped bracing for the next crisis. For years, every notification on my phone meant someone needed money. A small favor that somehow always cost hundreds of dollars. Even on vacation, I checked my banking app before checking the weather. I had built my entire adult life around preventing disasters that weren't mine. Now there was nothing left to prevent. The silence felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. Monday morning, I walked into Arkbridge Partners, carrying my laptop and a cup of coffee, expecting curious looks after disappearing for 3 days. Instead, Priya hurried toward me before I even reached my office. You have a minute? I smiled. For you? Always. She closed my office door behind us. Priya noticed the bruise immediately. Are you okay? It was the first genuine concern I'd heard all weekend. I will be, I answered honestly. She didn't press. She simply nodded. If you need anything, I know. As she left, I realized something uncomfortable. A colleague who had known me for less than 3 years had shown me more genuine concern than my own mother had shown in decades. At 10 o'clock, Dennis Calloway called me into his office. Dennis stood as I entered and gestured toward the chair. Sit! Dennis waited until I sat down before speaking. The Ellison team couldn't stop talking about you. I smiled politely. I'm glad it went well. It went exceptionally well. He leaned back. Marcus Webb called me personally. That surprised me. Personally? He said, and I'm quoting here, your vice president remained calmer under pressure than anyone we've interviewed in the last 5 years. I looked down for a second. If only Marcus knew. Dennis continued. I've been planning this conversation for months. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a promotion offer to senior vice president, along with a substantial raise and expanded leadership responsibilities. I looked back at him. I don't know what to say. Say yes? I laughed. Yes. Good. He smiled. And Evelyn? Yes? Whatever happened before that presentation? He glanced briefly toward the fading bruise. I'm impressed you showed up anyway. I held his gaze. So am I. 3 days passed before my father called again. By the time I answered 3 days later, he'd left 17 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and countless texts. His messages shifted from anger to blame, then bargaining, and finally desperation. I ignored all of them. On Friday afternoon, I answered. Not because I was ready emotionally, because there were practical matters that needed handling. Evelyn? His voice sounded older. I'm here. We need to talk. We're talking. A long pause. The mortgage company says... His words trailed off. I know what they said. They're talking about foreclosure. They're talking about missed payments. Evelyn? I didn't create that debt. You abandoned your family. I closed my office door before answering. No. I stopped protecting adults from their own choices. Silence. Then, I've been looking for work. That caught me off guard. You have? 3 interviews. I didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in years, he wasn't asking me for money. He was talking about employment. I almost didn't believe him. I hope one of them works out. Evelyn! Another pause. I was wrong. The word sounded unfamiliar coming from him. I lost my temper. You hit me. I know. No. My voice remained calm. You know you slapped me. You still don't understand what you destroyed. He didn't respond, because there wasn't an answer. I've arranged something for you. What? A housing counselor. He sounded confused. What? His name is Robert Finch. I gave him the phone number. He specializes in foreclosure prevention. You already called him. You did that? Before answering your calls. Another long silence. I don't want you homeless. I just won't pay your mortgage. There was a difference. A very important one. He quietly copied the number. I'll call. I hope you do. Before hanging up, he asked one final question. Does this mean you'll never forgive me? I looked out across the city. I don't know. Then I ended the call. Robert confirmed they were working through a loan modification and repayment plan. For the first time in over 5 years, my father was solving his own problems. Chloe never called. Not once. I eventually heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved in with a friend across Portland after the BMW was repossessed. Without my money covering her expenses, Chloe's influencer lifestyle collapsed almost overnight. A month later, someone tagged her in a social media photo. She was working behind the counter of a juice bar, still smiling, still wearing expensive-looking yoga clothes. But now she was wearing a name tag too. I stared at the photo longer than I expected, not because I enjoyed seeing her work, because I realized it was probably the first real job she'd ever had. Maybe circumstances would teach her what our parents never had. Maybe not. Either way, that lesson no longer belonged to me. My mother finally called the following week. Unlike my father, she sounded almost cheerful. Too cheerful. Evelyn. Hi, Mom. I've been thinking. I imagine you have. I think we all misunderstood each other. There it was again. The familiar attempt to rewrite what had happened. In her version, everything had become a misunderstanding instead of a choice. I closed my eyes. No. What do you mean? We didn't misunderstand. We experienced the same evening. You chose not to help me. You watched Dad hit me. You looked away. She immediately became defensive. I froze. You adjusted a pillow. Silence. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what not to do. My voice stayed gentle. You chose it. She began crying. I never wanted this. I know. I want my daughter back. I swallowed. I've always been your daughter. The question is, I paused. Were you ever willing to be my mother? The crying stopped. Completely. We remained silent for several seconds. Then I spoke one final time. When you're ready to talk about what actually happened, not the version that's easier to live with, you know where to find me. I ended the call. Not angrily. Just finished. The following Tuesday, I sat across from Dr. Renata Osei in the same quiet office where we'd spent nearly 2 years untangling my life. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything that had happened, from Seattle to the promotion and everything that followed with my family. When I finally stopped speaking, she asked the same question she always asked. How do you feel? I took a moment before answering honestly. I searched for the right word. Lighter. She smiled. Lighter isn't the same as happy. I know. Are you happy? No. I looked down at my hands. I'm grieving. What are you grieving? The family I kept believing would eventually exist. She nodded slowly. And what have you gained? For several moments, I couldn't answer. Then I smiled. Myself. Dr. Osei quietly wrote something in her notebook. She often did that only when something important had finally been spoken aloud. I had the feeling. This was one of those moments. 3 months passed faster than I expected. Work settled into its usual rhythm. Client meetings, strategy sessions, late-night revisions, and board presentations. The kind of pressure I had always been willing to carry because, unlike everything waiting for me at my parents' house, it was pressure that came with respect. Dennis kept his promise. The promotion became official. Senior Vice President of Client Strategy. When Human Resources announced it during the quarterly leadership meeting, the room erupted into applause. Priya hugged me before I even stood up. You earned every bit of this. For the first time in years, I accepted a compliment without immediately thinking about who else deserved the credit, because this one belonged to me. That evening, I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment overlooking Portland, with a glass of red wine in my hand. The city lights stretched below like scattered stars. 6 months earlier, a promotion like this would have been followed by a familiar ritual. I would have called my mother first. She would have congratulated me for exactly 30 seconds before asking whether I could increase the grocery budget or help Chloe with another business opportunity. My success had never stayed mine for very long. Someone always converted it into another obligation. That night, my phone remained silent, and I realized I preferred it that way. A week later, Robert Finch emailed again. With my father's written permission, he gave me a brief update. Arthur Hartwell had accepted a full-time position with a regional insurance brokerage. The salary wasn't what he'd once earned, but it was enough to stabilize the loan modification plan. The foreclosure proceedings had been paused. My parents would probably keep the house. I read the email twice. Then I quietly smiled. Not because I had been proven wrong, because they had been proven capable. Everything I'd been told for years. We can't survive without you. We'll lose everything. You're abandoning us. Had turned out to be false. They hadn't needed my money. They had needed my willingness to make life easier. There was a difference. One I would never confuse again. My father called that weekend. His voice sounded steadier than it had in months. I got the job. I heard. You knew? Robert updated me. He laughed awkwardly. I forgot you arranged that. I arranged help. You did the work. Another pause. I wanted to thank you. I leaned back on the sofa. You're welcome. I've been thinking a lot. I imagine you have. I spent years convincing myself you owed us. His voice cracked slightly. But you never did. That sentence settled heavily between us. It wasn't enough to erase what had happened. Nothing could. But it was the first time I had ever heard my father describe reality instead of rewriting it. I'm glad you understand that now, I said. I wish I had understood sooner. So do I. He hesitated. Would you come by sometime? I closed my eyes. Images returned instantly. The Persian rug. My mother's silence. The slap. Chloe filing her nails. I can't. Not yet? I don't know if yet is the right word. He accepted the answer without arguing. That alone told me how much had changed. 2 days later, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. I answered. Hello? Evelyn? The voice belonged to a woman. I'm sorry to bother you. Who is this? My name is Laura. I searched my memory. Nothing. I rent the apartment next to Chloe. Immediately, my attention sharpened. I'm calling because she sounded uncomfortable. Your sister mentioned you. My stomach tightened. What happened? Nothing dangerous. Laura hurried to reassure me. But she cried for almost an hour outside our building tonight. I said nothing. She kept saying she didn't understand why you abandoned her. The sentence landed strangely. Not painfully. Just distantly. Laura continued. I don't really know your family. I probably shouldn't even be calling. But Chloe said you were cold. She said you ruined her life. Another pause. Then she admitted you'd been paying nearly every bill she had for years. Laura sighed. I guess She hesitated. Wanted to tell you she finally started talking about getting another job. I smiled faintly. Thank you for calling. I hope I didn't overstep. You didn't. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes. Chloe still believed I had ruined her life. Not because I had harmed her. Because I had stopped rescuing her. There was a painful difference between those two things. One that she still couldn't see. And then late October brought the company's annual leadership retreat. 2 days at a resort outside Bend. During the second evening, Dennis invited several executives to dinner. Conversation drifted from business to family. One vice president proudly showed pictures of his grandchildren. Another joked about paying college tuition. Eventually, someone turned toward me. Evelyn. I looked up. What about your family? Months earlier, that question would have filled me with shame. Now, it simply required honesty. We're taking some space. The table became quiet. No one pushed for details. No one offered unwanted advice. Dennis merely nodded. I hope it's peaceful. It is. I surprised myself with how true those words felt. A month later, I returned to my parents' house for the first time. Not to reconcile. Not for dinner. Only to collect the last few boxes of my belongings. I chose a Tuesday afternoon after confirming both of my parents would be meeting Robert Finch at the bank. I didn't want another confrontation. My friend Melissa came with me. The front door key still worked. Walking inside felt surreal. The house looked almost exactly the same. The framed family photographs. The leather sofa. The dining table where birthdays had been celebrated. The living room. I stopped walking. The Persian rug was still there, exactly where I'd left it. Melissa looked at me carefully. Are you okay? I nodded. I will be. We packed books, old photographs, university notebooks, and a few keepsakes from my grandmother. Then I returned to the living room. Without saying a word, I rolled the Persian rug tightly from one end to the other. Melissa raised an eyebrow. I bought it. Then it belongs with you. Together we carried it outside. As I loaded it into the moving van, I looked back toward the front door. For years, I had believed that rug represented my mother's love. Now, it represented something entirely different. Proof that I had spent years trying to purchase affection that had never been available for sale. I closed the van doors and drove away. The rug eventually found a new home. Not in my apartment, in my office at Arkbridge. It fit perfectly beneath the conference table where my leadership team met every Monday morning. 8 feet by 10, cream-colored, hand-knotted. Every week, people walked across it while discussing million-dollar strategies and impossible deadlines. No one knew its history. No one knew I had once lain bleeding on those same fibers. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. The rug no longer reminded me of betrayal. It reminded me of survival, of the exact place where my old life had ended, and the first quiet step toward the new one had begun. As winter approached, I believed the hardest part was finally behind me. I was wrong, because someone I hadn't expected was about to appear and force my family to confront a truth they had spent years trying to bury. I learned something unexpected during the months that followed. Silence has a way of making people reveal themselves. When I stopped explaining, defending, and fixing everything, other people started talking. Friends, relatives, neighbors, former coworkers of my father's, people I hadn't heard from in years. Each conversation showed me another piece of a story I had never fully understood. One Saturday morning, my Aunt Margaret called. She was my mother's older sister, practical to the point of bluntness, and one of the few relatives who had never asked me for money. "I've been meaning to call," she said. "I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from anyone connected to the family." "I appreciate it." She hesitated. "I spoke with your father yesterday." I waited. He cried. That surprised me, not because I believed men shouldn't cry, because my father had spent 31 years treating vulnerability as weakness. "He admitted he hit you." I remained silent. "He also admitted he expected you to come back after a few days." A sad smile crossed my face. "So did I." Margaret sighed. "He genuinely believed you'd cool off, restart the payments, and everyone would pretend nothing happened." "I know. He said he never imagined you would actually leave." The irony almost made me laugh. I hadn't imagined it either. Not until the moment I stood up from that Persian rug. Bad. 2 weeks later, Dennis stopped by my office carrying 2 coffee cups. "I figured you've earned a break." I'll never turn down good coffee. He sat across from me. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. You don't have to answer." I nodded. "Fair enough." He looked at me carefully. "You've changed." "I hope that's a compliment." "It is." He smiled. "When you first joined Arkbridge, you apologized constantly." "I did?" "For everything." He counted on his fingers. "Meetings running 2 minutes late. Someone else's scheduling mistake. A client changing their mind. You even apologized when I spilled coffee on my own shirt." I laughed. "I forgot about that." "I didn't." He leaned forward. "You don't apologize like that anymore." I thought about it. He was right. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped assuming every inconvenience was somehow my responsibility. That's probably healthy. I think so too. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth." "Yes?" "I'm proud of the executive you've become." After he left, I stared out my office window. Executive, leader, professional. Those titles had never felt difficult. The difficult role had always been daughter. December arrived with cold rain and shorter days. A week before Christmas, my mother sent me a handwritten letter. Not a text, not an email. A real letter. I almost didn't open it. Eventually, curiosity won. The first page was filled with memories. Christmas mornings, school plays, birthday parties, vacations. Every happy memory she could think of. Only on the 3rd page did she finally write about that night. She admitted my father had been wrong. She admitted she should have defended me. But then, the letter changed. She wrote that families sometimes hurt each other, that forgiveness required compromise, that everyone had made mistakes. Everyone, including me. I folded the letter carefully, then I placed it back into the envelope. Because once again, the truth had almost been acknowledged. Almost, but not quite. There is a profound difference between saying, "I hurt you," and saying, "We all made mistakes." One accepts responsibility, the other distributes it. I wasn't willing to pretend those were the same thing. Yeah. A few days later, I received another unexpected call. This time, it was Chloe. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I got promoted." That wasn't what I expected. "Congratulations." "I'm assistant manager now." "I mean that." "Congratulations." She laughed nervously. "I never thought working 40 hours a week would be this hard." "I know. I used to think you exaggerated. You told me office jobs weren't real work." "I remember." Another. Then she quietly asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Were you really paying for everything?" The question hurt more than I expected. Not because she asked. Because she genuinely didn't know. "You never noticed?" "Dad always said." She stopped herself. "What did he say?" "That everything came from his savings." I closed my eyes. "Of course. I was paying almost $4,000 every month." She whispered, "For 5 years?" "Yes." I didn't know. For the first time since that awful night, I believed her. She really hadn't known. She had benefited from the arrangement, but our parents had carefully hidden where the money came from. "I thought," her voice trembled, "I thought you were just being selfish." "I know. I'm sorry." Simple words, quiet words, without excuses, without blaming anyone else. Just, "I'm sorry." Unexpectedly, tears filled my eyes. Not because everything was fixed, It wasn't. But because genuine accountability sounded so different from manipulation that I recognized it immediately. I appreciate you saying that. I don't expect forgiveness. I know. She inhaled shakily. I wanted you to know I finally understand. We talked for almost 20 minutes. About work, about responsibility, about how strange adulthood really feels when no one rescues you. When we hung up, I wasn't certain we would ever become close again. But for the first time, I believed reconciliation might one day be possible. Not because of time, because of honesty. Belsom. The new year began quietly. One rainy afternoon, Dr. Renata Osei asked me a question I hadn't considered. If your father walked through that door today, she gestured toward the office entrance. What would you want him to say? I answered immediately. Nothing. She raised an eyebrow. I don't need better words. I looked down at my hands. I needed different actions. She smiled. That's an important distinction. It took me 31 years to learn it. She nodded thoughtfully. People often mistake apologies for change, and they aren't the same thing. No. She smiled gently. Change is an apology repeated every day. I carried that sentence home with me. Over the following weeks, I watched. Not what my parents promised. What they actually did. My father continued working. He never asked for money again. He kept meeting with Robert Finch. He slowly caught up on the mortgage. My mother found full-time bookkeeping work. For the first time in years, she contributed regularly to household expenses. Neither of them became perfect, but they became responsible. Responsibility, I realized, was far more convincing than remorse. One rainy evening, I stood in my office after everyone else had gone home. The Persian rug lay beneath the conference table exactly where it had for months. I walked across it slowly, then stopped in the center. I remembered lying there with blood in my mouth. I remembered believing my family would never change. In some ways, I had been right. They hadn't changed because I begged them to. They changed because I finally stepped away and allowed reality to reach them. The rug had once represented everything I had lost. Now, it reminded me of everything I had finally reclaimed. There was only one conversation left. The one I had avoided for nearly a year. Sooner or later, I knew I would have to face my father one last time. Not to decide whether he deserved forgiveness, but to decide whether I was finally ready to close the last open chapter of my old life. Almost a year passed before I agreed to see my father. Not because he stopped asking, because I finally stopped feeling pressured by the question. There is a difference between forgiveness freely given and forgiveness extracted through guilt. For most of my life, I couldn't tell those two things apart. Now I could. When he called that spring, his voice sounded different again. Not desperate, not demanding. Just careful. Would you meet me? I looked out through my office window at the Portland skyline. Where? Anywhere you choose. I thought for a moment. There's a coffee shop on Northwest 23rd. I'll be there.
Big Pops.
He was already sitting outside when I arrived. For a second, I barely recognized him. He looked thinner. His hair had gone noticeably grayer. The expensive confidence he had worn for decades was gone, replaced by something quieter. He stood as I approached. Thank you for coming. I nodded and sat across from him. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Finally, he reached into his jacket and placed a folded envelope on the table. I wrote this. I didn't touch it. I thought I'd say it better on paper. You might. He smiled sadly. I probably deserve that. The waitress brought coffee. Neither of us reached for it immediately. My father looked down at his hands. I've rewritten that letter 12 times. I believe you. I kept trying to explain myself. He looked up. Then I realized explanations were just another way of asking you to make me feel better. I remained silent. So I'll only tell you what matters. He took a slow breath. I hit my daughter. His voice trembled. You came to me because you needed help. I responded with violence. I humiliated you. I taught your mother and your sister that your pain didn't deserve protecting. He swallowed hard. And I spent years treating your generosity like a paycheck instead of an act of love. Tears filled his eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect another chance. I only wanted you to hear me admit it without excuses. For several moments, I couldn't speak. Not because I was overwhelmed. Because this was the first time in my life my father had described reality exactly as it happened. No blame. No rewriting. No but. Just truth. I finally picked up the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Almost every sentence matched what he'd just said. At the bottom was one final paragraph. Whether you choose to have me in your life again is your decision. I spent too many years believing your love was something I was entitled to. If we ever build a relationship again, I want it to be because you chose it, not because you felt responsible for me. I folded the letter carefully, then looked back at him. I appreciate this. He nodded. I know appreciation isn't forgiveness. No, it isn't. We talked for another hour. Not about money. Not about the mortgage. Not about the past. We talked about his new job. About how strange it felt to start over in his 50s. About learning to budget. about how embarrassed he'd been asking younger managers for help with software he didn't understand. For the first time, we sounded less like a father lecturing his daughter, and more like two adults having an honest conversation. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "I won't call unless you call first." I believed him. That mattered. Then, several weeks later, I received another invitation. This one surprised me. My mother wanted to meet. Alone. We met at a small botanical garden just outside Portland. She walked beside me for several minutes before speaking. "I started therapy." I looked at her. "You did?" She nodded. "My therapist asked me something." "What?" She asked why I adjusted the pillow. My chest tightened. "I've been asking myself that every day since." She stopped walking. "I was afraid of your father." I listened. I convinced myself staying quiet kept the peace. She looked down. "But silence doesn't keep peace. It protects whoever is causing the harm." I felt tears forming. "I failed you." "You did." She nodded slowly. "I know. No defense. No minimizing. Just acceptance. I don't expect you to forgive me. I know. She struggled to continue. "I wanted to become someone who would never make that choice again." For the first time in nearly a year, I hugged my mother. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It wasn't the kind of embrace that instantly erased decades of hurt. It was simply two women acknowledging that healing, if it happened at all, would happen one truthful conversation at a time. "Get him," Chloe called a month later. I signed in the lease. "For your own apartment?" She laughed. "My own apartment. I'm proud of you. I bought my own couch." "You sound excited." "I am." Then she added quietly, "It feels different when you earn it yourself." I smiled. "I know." She paused. "I understand now why you stopped." That was all she said. She didn't need to say more. Tian. Life settled into something wonderfully ordinary. Dennis had been right. After the dramatic parts, yes, life rarely stays dramatic. It becomes meetings, laundry, phone calls, coffee with friends, Monday morning strategy sessions, books left half finished on the nightstand, long walks after work. Peace isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply arrives one quiet day and realizes nobody asked it to leave. 3 months after my promotion, I bought my own condominium overlooking the Willamette River. Not because I needed a bigger home, because I finally wanted one that belonged entirely to me. On moving day, my friends helped unpack. The last thing we carried upstairs was the Persian rug. They rolled it across the living room floor. "It fits perfectly," Melissa said. I smiled. It always belongs somewhere peaceful. No one else understood why that sentence mattered. I did. Get you. Every Monday morning, before heading to the office, I still make coffee on my balcony. Sometimes I think about the young woman who believed love had to be earned by paying everyone else's bills. I wish I could tell her something. Not that life would become easy. Not that families always change. Not even that justice always arrives. I would simply tell her this. One day you will stop confusing sacrifice with love. You will stop believing your worth depends on how much of yourself you can give away. You will learn that boundaries aren't punishments. They're invitations. They invite people to love you honestly. And if someone refuses, the boundary still did its job. I still have the letter my father handed me in that coffee shop. I don't read it often. I don't need to. Because the words that mattered most aren't written on the page anymore. They're reflected in the life he chose afterward. The same is true for my mother. The same is true for Chloe. People can change, but only after someone finally allows them to experience the consequences of remaining exactly as they are. Sometimes I think back to that night. The Persian rug, the sting across my cheek, the rain outside, walking out without shouting, without threatening, without looking back. For years, I believed the worst thing that ever happened to me was the moment my father raised his hand. Now I understand something different. That moment wasn't the end of my life. It was the end of my willingness to disappear inside someone else's expectations. The bruise healed. My family learned to carry their own responsibilities, and I finally stopped carrying them for everyone else. The house remained standing because the people living inside it finally learned to carry its weight themselves. As for me, I finally understood something no promotion or paycheck could ever teach me. I was never valuable because I paid for everyone else's life. I was valuable because I had always been enough. The slap didn't give me my worth. It forced me to stop looking for it in other people's approval.